The summer of 1998 was unusually warm in Brighton, a quaint seaside town on England's south coast, where the air always carried the temps of salt and the distant hum of ferries crossing the English Channel. On July 14th, the Hargreaves family woke early, their modest terrace house on Elm Grove buzzing with excitement. John Hargreaves, a 42-year-old accountant known for his meticulous habits, packed the family's blue Ford Escort with a wicker picnic basket, a thermos of tea, a red and white cooler, and a bright red kite that 8-year-old Thomas had begged to bring his wife, Margaret, a 39-year-old nurse at the Royal Sussex County Hospital, tucked a jar of homemade strawberry jam into the basket, her warm laugh filling the car as she teased 12-year-old Emily about her new sun hat. Emily, a shy girl with a love for sketching seascapes, clutched her sketchbook, while Thomas, a bundle of energy, bounced in his seat, eager to build sandcastles on Hove Beach, a stretch of pebbled shoreline just west of Brighton's famous West Pier. It was a family tradition, one they'd kept every summer since Emily was a toddler, and the day promised to be perfect. Hove Beach was busy that morning, the pebbles crunching underfoot as families spread out colorful blankets and children darted toward the waves, their laughter mingling with the cries of seagulls overhead. The Hargreaves settled near a weathered wooden groin, a spot they always chose for its view of the horizon and the shade it offered from the midday sun. John unfolded a striped deck chair, his glasses slipping down his nose as he watched Thomas run toward the water with a plastic bucket. Margaret called after him to stay close, her voice soft but firm, while Emily sat cross-legged on the blanket, sketching the pier in the distance, its iron structure rusted but still standing proud. Against the blue sky, the family shared sandwiches, a mustard for the adults, peanut butter for the kids, and Margaret poured tea from the thermos, the steam rising in the warm air. For a few hours, everything was idyllic, the kind of day that would linger in memory as a golden moment of togetherness. But as the afternoon crept in, the weather shifted. A thick fog rolled off the channel, sudden and heavy, blanketing the beach in a matter of minutes. The temperature dropped, and the laughter of other families faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Margaret glanced at her watch, 3:45 p.m., and suggested they pack up, her voice tinged with unease as she scanned the shoreline for Thomas. John stood, shielding his eyes against the mist, calling out for his son, but the fog swallowed his voice. Emily, clutching her sketchbook, pointed toward the water where she'd last seen Thomas splashing near the groin. The family moved quickly, gathering their things, but the fog grew denser, reducing visibility to mere feet. By 4 p.m., the beach was nearly deserted, the other families having fled the unsettling weather, leaving the Hargreaves alone in the haze. At 4:17 p.m., Peter Grayson, a 53-year-old fisherman who'd spent his life on these waters, was hauling in his nets a mile offshore when he noticed something strange on the beach through his binoculars. The Hargreaves' blue Ford Escort sat abandoned near the water's edge, its doors wide open, the picnic basket tipped over with sandwiches scattered across the pebbles. A single sandal Thomas's, with its bright blue strap, lay on the wet sand, a tiny footprint trailing toward the sea before disappearing into the surf. Peter radioed the Coast Guard, his voice tight with concern, and within an hour, the beach was swarming with responders. Searchlights cut through the fog there, beams reflecting off the waves, but there was no sign of the family, no shouts, no footsteps, nothing. The Coast Guard found Margaret's sun hat tangled in seaweed near the waterline, its pink ribbon flapping in the wind, but the Hargreaves had vanished, as if the sea had swallowed them whole. Word spread quickly through Brighton's tight-knit community, and by evening, the local police station on John Street was flooded with calls from worried neighbors. The Hargreaves were well liked. John volunteered at the community center, and Margaret often baked for the school fair. Their disappearance felt personal, a wound to the town's sense of safety. Inspector Helen Carter, a 15-year veteran of the Sussex Police, took charge of the case, her stern face hiding the dread she felt as she surveyed the abandoned picnic site. She interviewed the few witnesses who'd been on the beach before the fog rolled in, a retired couple who'd seen the family laughing earlier, and a teenage lifeguard who swore he'd heard a child scream around 3:50 p.m., though he couldn't be sure through the mist. Helen's team combed the shoreline, finding nothing but the family's belongings. The cooler. The kite tangled in a groin in Emily's sketchbook, its pages smeared with salt water. Her last drawing, a half-finished sketch of the pier, was barely visible. The next 10 days were a blur of search efforts and sleepless nights. The Coast Guard scoured the channel, divers braved the chilly waters, and volunteers walked the cliffs from Hove to Rottingdean, calling out the family's names. Until their voices grew hoarse, the media descended on Brighton, with headlines in the Brighton Argus reading, "Family of 4 vanishes in fog," while national papers speculated about rogue waves or abductions. Rumors swirled. Some said the family had been swept out too. Others whispered of a stranger seen lurking near the pier that day, a man in a dark coat who disappeared as quickly as the fog. Emily's best friend, 12-year-old Sarah, told her parents she'd heard Thomas's voice calling from the mist. Hours after the family vanished, though her parents dismissed it as grief, Margaret's sister Clara clung to hope, organizing candlelit vigils along the shore, where the community gathered each night, their flames flickering in the wind as they prayed for a miracle. On the morning of July 24th, 1998, Peter Grayson was fishing again, his boat rocking gently in the gray waters of the channel, when his net caught on something heavy. He hauled it aboard, expecting driftwood or a lost anchor, but instead found the Hargreaves red and white cooler, its lid cracked open, bobbing aimlessly in the current. Inside, tangled in a soaked life jacket, was Margaret's gold locket. The one she never took off, its clasp broken. A scrap of paper, damp but legible, was tucked into the locket's chain. With a single word scrawled in John's neat handwriting, "Help." Peter's hand shook as he radioed the Coast Guard, his voice barely steady. The discovery sent a shockwave through Brighton. Proof the family had been in the water, but no bodies, no boat, no explanation. The Coast Guard expanded their search, radius now stretching from Dover to Portsmouth, but the sea remained stubbornly silent. That same day, a retired detective named Robert Ellis, who had moved to Brighton after a long career with the Metropolitan Police, caught wind of the case. Robert, a wiry man in his late 60s with a penchant for puzzles, had a reputation for solving cold cases others deemed hopeless. Something about the Hargreaves' disappearance gnawed at him. The fog, the cooler, the single word on the note. He visited the police station, where Helen reluctantly shared the case file, sensing Robert's determination might uncover something her team had missed. Robert spent hours at Hove Beach, pacing the pebbles where the family had last been seen, the fog long gone but its memory lingering in the air. He noticed the groin near their picnic spot, its wood splintered and old. Don wondered if it held a clue the searchers had overlooked. Robert's next stop was the Brighton Library, where he dug into the town's archives, searching for anything that might connect to the Hargreaves case. After hours of sifting through dusty records, he found a chilling parallel. A family of 3 had vanished from Hove Beach in 1972 under similar circumstances. Their car, a green Morris Minor, had been found abandoned, doors open, with a cooler drifting offshore a week later. The case was never solved. The family presumed drowned, but Robert's instincts told him there was more to the story. He photocopied the article, his mind racing with possibilities. Was this a coincidence, or had the sea been hiding a darker secret for decades? As the first part of the investigation closed, Brighton remained on edge. The Hargreaves' disappearance a wound that refused to heal. Clara hung posters around town, her hands trembling as she taped Emily's photo to a lamppost near the pier. The community whispered theories, some practical, others outlandish. But no one could explain the cooler, the note, or the family's sudden absence. Robert sat in his small flat on Marine Parade, the case file spread across his dining table. A map of the coastline marked with red pins. He knew the answer was out there, buried in the fog of that July day, waiting for someone to find it. But as the days stretched on, the mystery only deepened, and the sea kept its secrets close. The discovery of the cooler, on July 24th, 1998, turned Brighton into a town gripped by unease, its cobblestone streets echoing with whispers as the Hargreaves' disappearance dominated every conversation. Robert Ellis sat in his cluttered flat on Marine Parade, the salty breeze drifting through his open window as he studied the photocopied article about the 1972 disappearance. The parallels were uncanny. A family, Thomas and Edith Caldwell, with their 10-year-old daughter Lucy, had vanished from Hove Beach under a fog just as thick. Their green Morris Minor was left abandoned, doors flung open, and a cooler was found. Floating offshore a week later, containing Edith's silver bracelet. No bodies were ever recovered, and the case was chalked up to a tragic accident, though the local coroner noted the lack of debris or wreckage. Robert traced his finger along the faded newsprint, his mind racing. Could this be more than coincidence? He returned to Hove Beach the next morning, the pebbles crunching under his worn boots as he approached the groin where the Hargreaves had last been seen. The splintered wood bore faint scratches, possibly from a boat's hull or a desperate hand, and Robert jotted notes in his pocketbook, his sharp eyes scanning for anything the Coast Guard might have missed. Peter Grayson, the local fisherman, joined him, his weathered face etched with worry after finding the cooler. "I've fished these waters for 30 years, Peter said, his voice low, "and I've never seen a current take a family like that, not without leaving something behind." He pointed to the tide line, where a glint of metal caught the sunlight, a rusted fishing hook tangled in seaweed, its barb bent as if yanked free in a struggle. Robert bagged it as evidence, his pulse quickening with the possibility of a lead. Back at the Sussex police station on John Street, Inspector Helen Carter was growing frustrated. The initial search had yielded nothing beyond the sandal, sun hat, and cooler, and the Coast Guard's divers reported murky waters with no sign of the family. Helen interviewed Clara, Margaret's sister, who sat clutching a photo of Emily, her eyes red from sleepless nights. "They wouldn't just leave their things," Clara insisted, her voice breaking. "John was too careful, and Margaret would have fought to protect the kids." Helen nodded, noting Clara's observation. That the family's car keys were missing from the escort, suggesting they might have been lured away. She cross-checked missing persons records, finding no similar cases in the past decade. But Robert's mention of 1972 piqued her interest. She agreed to let him assist, albeit reluctantly, his experience a potential key to cracking the case. Spent the afternoon at the Brighton Library, delving deeper into the Caldwell disappearance. The archives revealed a coroner's report hinting at foul play. Edith's bracelet had a broken clasp, and a witness claimed to have seen a small boat near the shore that foggy day, though no one followed up. Robert requested old tide charts from the Met Office, discovering that both 1972 and 1998 saw unusually strong currents on the dates of the vanishings, possibly linked to a rare tidal anomaly. He sketched a timeline connecting the dots: foggy conditions, abandoned vehicles, coolers with personal items, and no bodies. Could someone be exploiting these conditions? Interviewed a retired Coast Guard officer, Arthur Wells, who recalled rumors of smugglers using the fog to move goods along the coast decades ago, though no evidence had ever surfaced. Meanwhile, the community's vigils grew larger, candles lining the shore each night as the Hargreaves photos fluttered on lampposts. Sarah, Emily's friend, became a quiet fixture at these gatherings, her claim of hearing Thomas's voice gaining traction among the superstitious. One evening, she approached Robert with a drawing Emily had given her weeks before, a sketch of Hove Beach with a shadowy figure near the groin, its face obscured. "She said it felt wrong," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling. Robert studied the sketch, noting the figure's coat and hat matched the stranger the lifeguard had mentioned. Ordered a sketch artist to refine it. Hoping to jog someone's memory, the investigation took a turn when a local historian, Margaret Finch, contacted Robert with a lead. She had uncovered a 19th-century logbook from a Brighton shipping company, mentioning a wreck off Hove in 1845, where smugglers hid goods in underwater caves along the coast. The log described a cave accessible only during low tide and thick fog, its entrance masked by the groin. Robert's heart raced. Could the families have stumbled into something sinister? He convinced Helen to organize a dive team to explore the area, despite the risks posed by the unpredictable currents. Team prepared for the next low tide, scheduled for August 1st, 1998. As the town held its breath, on July 30th, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A fisherman found a life jacket washed ashore near Rottingdean, its strap torn and stained with what looked like blood. Forensic tests confirmed it belonged to Thomas, the fabric matching his size. The discovery fueled speculation. Had the family been attacked, dragged into the sea? Robert revisited the groin, noticing a faint scrape on its base that aligned with a boat's keel. He theorized the family might have been lured onto a vessel, the fog providing cover. But the help note suggested they'd been aware of danger. He cross-referenced tide data with smuggling routes, finding a pattern of activity every 26 years. Aligning with 1972 and 1998, was someone reviving an old trade, using the families as cover? As August approached, the pressure mounted. Helen's team canvassed the waterfront, interviewing old-timers who recalled tales of the fog phantom, legendary smuggler said to vanish into the mist. One man, a 70-year-old pub regular named George, claimed he'd seen a boat near the groin on July 14th, its engine muffled, but dismissed it as imagination. Robert pressed him, and George admitted seeing a figure in a dark coat, possibly the same one from Emily's sketch. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle remained incomplete. The dive team geared up, their equipment clanking as they prepared to descend into the cave, the town's hopes pinned on what they might find. Robert stood on the shore, the fog of that fateful day replaying in his mind, knowing the answer lay beneath the waves. The morning of August 1st, 1998, was crisp and clear in Brighton, a stark contrast to the foggy day the Hargreaves family had vanished. The tide was at its lowest, exposing jagged rocks along Hove Beach that glistened with seaweed and barnacles. Robert Ellis stood on the shore, his coat flapping in the wind, watching the Sussex police dive team prepare their equipment near the groin. Inspector Helen Carter had secured a 5-man team led by a seasoned diver, Michael Hayes, who'd explored the channel's depths for over a decade. Michael adjusted his oxygen tank, his face grim as he studied the tide charts Robert had provided. If there's a cave down there, the currents will be brutal, he warned, pointing to a narrow gap beneath the groin, where the water churned violently. Robert nodded, clutching the 19th century logbook that mentioned the smuggler's cave, its faded pages now a lifeline in the search for answers. The dive began at 9:15 a.m. The team descending into the murky waters as a small crowd of locals, gathered on the beach, their faces etched with hope and dread. Clara, Margaret's sister, stood among them, clutching a candle from the nightly vigils, her knuckles white as she whispered a prayer. The divers' headlamps flickered beneath the surface, illuminating a world of shadows and silt. After 20 minutes, Michael's voice crackled over the radio. We found it a cave entrance, just where the logbook said. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to slip through, its edges smoothed by centuries of tides. Inside, the cave widened into a cavern, its walls slick with algae and pocked with small crevices. The divers fanned out their lights, sweeping the darkness, searching for any sign of the Hargreaves family or the Caldwells from 1972. The first discovery came quickly. Its bright yellow, faded but unmistakable, wedged into a crevice 15 feet inside the cave. Michael bagged it, noting its similarity to Thomas's bucket described in the case file. Deeper in, the divers found a torn piece of fabric, a scrap of Emily's sun hat, its pink ribbon faded but intact, tangled with fishing line. The findings were chilling, proof that the family had been in the cave, but the divers pressed on, their air tanks ticking down. Near the back of the cavern, they spotted something larger, a rusted metal box, half buried in silt, its lid pried open. Inside were old bottles, their labels long gone, and a tarnished pocket watch engraved with the initials T.C., Thomas Caldwell, the father from the 1972 disappearance. Robert's theory of a smuggler's hideout gained weight, but the Hargreaves' fate remained elusive. Back on the surface, the discovery sent a ripple through the investigation. Helen had the items catalogued, the bucket and fabrics sent for forensic analysis, while Robert examined the pocket watch, its hands frozen at 3:22, possibly the time of the Caldwells' disappearance. The watch's chain was tangled with a strand. A fishing line, the same type Peter Grayson had found near the groin. Robert's mind churned. The cave was a smuggler's den, but what had happened to the families? Were they collateral damage in a smuggling operation, or something more sinister? He interviewed Michael, who described the cave's layout. Narrow passages branching off the main cavern. Too tight for the divers to explore without specialized gear. "There's more down there," Michael said, his voice heavy. "The communities." Reaction was a mix of hope and horror. The Brighton Argus ran a front-page story, "Cave Discovery and Missing Family Case," fueling speculation across the town. Some believed the families had drowned, their bodies swept out to sea through the cave's passages, while others whispered of a fog phantom still haunting the coast. Clara clung to the news of the bucket, insisting it meant her family was alive, but Helen warned her to brace for the worst. The forensic report on Thomas's life jacket came back. The blood was his, but the quantity suggested a minor injury, not a fatal one. The fabric from Emily's sun hat showed traces of salt water and algae, confirming it had been submerged for weeks, but no DNA beyond hers was found. Robert turned his attention to the smuggler angle, digging into Brighton's maritime history with renewed focus. He met with Margaret Finch, the historian, who brought more records from the 1800s letters between shipping merchants hinting at a smuggling ring that operated along the Sussex coast, using fog as cover to move contraband like tobacco and liquor. The ring had a leader known only as the Captain, a shadowy figure who vanished into legend after a raid in 1850. Margaret also found a 1970s newspaper clipping about a fisherman who'd claimed to see a boat near Hove during foggy days, only to be dismissed as a drunk. Robert cross-referenced the dates with tide anomalies, noting a pattern: 1845, 1972. In 1998, all saw rare tidal surges during foggy conditions, perfect for smuggling. The investigation gained momentum when George, the pub regular, returned with a clearer memory. He'd seen a boat on July 14, 1998, near the groin, its hull painted black, with two men aboard, one in a dark coat, the other at the helm. George had been too far to see their faces, but the boat's engine was unusually quiet, designed for stealth. Robert showed him Emily's sketch of the shadowy figure, and George nodded slowly. "That's him, the man in the coat," he said, his voice trembling. Lynn issued a public appeal for information, releasing the sketch to the media, and tips began pouring in. Most were dead ends, but one caller, an elderly woman named Doris, claimed she'd seen a similar boat docked near Shoreham Bicey in the weeks before the disappearance. Its crew unloading crates at night, Robert and Helen drove to Shoreham, a small port town west of Brighton, to investigate. The harbor was quiet, its docks lined with fishing boats and the occasional yacht. They spoke to the harbor master, a gruff man named Allen, who confirmed a black-hulled boat had been spotted in June 1998, but its owner never registered. Allen pointed them to an old warehouse at the edge of the harbor, abandoned since the 1980s, where the boat had been seen. Inside the warehouse was a maze of rusted machinery and broken crates, the air thick with the smell of damp wood. In a corner, Robert found a pile of old ropes, their knots matching the fishing line from the cave. Nearby was a faded photograph, half buried in dust, a group of men on a boat, one in a dark coat holding a crate marked fragile. The photo was dated 1971, a year before the Caldwells vanished. The find was a breakthrough, but it raised more questions. Was the man in the coat a smuggler still operating after all these years? Had the Hargreaves and Caldwells stumbled into his operation, becoming unintended victims? Robert's theory evolved. The families might have been taken to the cave either as witnesses to silence or as part of a larger scheme. The help note suggested they'd been alive after their disappearance, but the blood on Thomas's life jacket hinted at violence. Helen ordered a second dive, this time with smaller equipment to explore the cave's passages, scheduled for August 5th. As the team prepared, Robert sat on the beach, watching the waves crash against the groin, the mystery deepening with every clue. The sea held the truth, but it wasn't ready to let go, not yet. The morning of August 5th, 1998, arrived with a gray, overcast sky over Brighton, the air heavy with the scent of rain as the second dive into the smuggler's cave at Hove Beach commenced. Robert Ellis stood on the shore, his hands in his coat pockets, watching the dive team assemble with specialized equipment, smaller tanks and flexible probes to navigate the narrow passages beyond the main cavern. Inspector Helen Carter briefed the team, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face after weeks of fruitless searches. Michael Hayes, the lead diver, adjusted his gear, his expression focused as he reviewed the tide charts Robert had marked with the 26-year anomaly pattern. The plan was to explore the branching tunnels, hoping to find evidence that would finally unravel the Hargreaves' fate and perhaps the Caldwells. 2. The dive began at 8:30 a.m., the team descending into the cold, dark waters as the tide receded, exposing more of the cave's jagged entrance. The crowd on the beach was smaller this time, the initial excitement replaced by a somber anticipation. Clara lingered near the groin, her eyes fixed on the bubbles breaking the surface. While local fishermen like Peter Grayson watched from their boats, their nets idle, underwater, Michael led the way, his headlamp illuminating a tunnel that sloped downward, its walls lined with barnacles and the occasional glint of metal. After 10 minutes, the team reached a fork. 2 passages, one leading deeper into the cliff, the other veering toward the sea. Michael chose the inland route, his instincts guided by the logbook's mention of a hidden chamber. The passage tightened, forcing the divers to crawl, their tanks scraping against the rock, at 9 a.m. Michael's radio crackled with excitement. "We've hit a chamber, a big one." The cavern opened into a vaulted space, its ceiling dripping with stalactites, the floor littered with debris. The divers fanned out, their lights catching a pile of objects near the center, a jumble of clothing, ropes, and what looked like a small boat's rudder, its wood rotted, but bearing traces of black paint. Beneath it, they found a metal crate, its lid rusted shut, marked with the same fragile stamp as the photo from the Shoreham warehouse. Michael pried it open with a crowbar, revealing stacks of old tobacco tins, their labels faded, and a leather journal, its pages swollen with seawater. The journal was a gold mine, written in cramped handwriting. It chronicled the activities of a smuggling ring led by a man called the Captain. Active from the 1840s to the 1970s, entries detailed the use of Hove Beach's cave during foggy tides to hide goods, with a note from 1972 mentioning the Caldwell's interruption. Family saw the boat. Taken to silence. Bodies weighted and sunk. A later entry, dated July 14, 1998, read another family stumbled in. Hargreaves, fog-perfect cover. Supposed the same way. The divers' stomachs churned as they bagged the journal, the truth sinking in. Michael searched further, finding a pile of weighted sacks, their contents heavy with stones. And beneath one, a small hand, its skin pale and waterlogged, clutching a locket identical to Margaret's, back on the shore. The divers emerged at 10:15 a.m., their faces grim as they handed over the evidence. Helen ordered the sacks exhumed. The forensic teams confirmed the remains of 4 individuals, 2 adults and 2 children, matching the Hargreaves descriptions. The locket bore Margaret's initials M.H. engraved inside, while a child's bracelet found nearby had T.H. Thomas Hargreaves. The community reeled, the vigils turning into memorials as candles flickered along the beach. Robert examined the journal, his hands steady despite the horror, noting a final entry. Captain retires. Last run, 1998. Cave sealed. The smuggler had ended his reign with the Hargreaves. Using the fog and cave to erase his tracks, the investigation shifted to identifying the captain. Robert cross-referenced the journal's dates with Shoreham's harbor logs, finding a boat registered to a Henry Lawson, a fisherman who'd retired in 1999 to a cottage in New Haven, 10 miles east of Brighton. Lawson, now 78, had a record of minor smuggling charges in the 1960s, dismissed as petty offenses. Helen and Robert drove to New Haven, the coastal road winding past cliffs and fishing villages. They found Lawson in a weathered cottage, his face lined with age, dark coat hanging by the door, the same one from Emily's sketch. Confronted with the journal, Lawson broke down, admitting he'd run the ring for decades, using the cave. During fog to avoid detection, Family saw too much, he rasped. Lawson confessed to luring the Caldwells and Hargreaves onto his boat under the pretense of help, then weighting their bodies with stones and sinking them in the cave's depths. He'd used the fog to cover his tracks, the coolers and notes, planted to mislead searchers. The 26-year pattern was his retirement cycle, striking when tides aligned. Helen arrested him, the evidence overwhelming, but the town mourned the lost families. Forensic teams recovered more remains from the cave, confirming the Caldwells' identities, closing a 26-year-old case. Robert sat on Hove Beach that evening, the journal in his lap, the sea's rhythm a reminder of its secrets. The case dominated headlines. Smuggler's Cave reveals double tragedy. But a final twist emerged among Lawson's belongings. Police found a locked chest, its key hidden in his coat. Inside was a stack of letters, one addressed to the captain from a woman named Evelyn, dated 1972, pleading for her family's safety. The Caldwells. The letter hinted at blackmail, suggesting Lawson had a partner who'd forced his hand. The name was smudged, but the postmark read London. Helen vowed to track this partner, the puzzle not yet complete. The arrest of Henry Lawson on August 6th. 1998 sent shockwaves through Brighton, the quaint seaside town now a focal point of a national scandal. The Brighton Argus blared. Smuggler confesses to double murders, its pages filled with grainy photos of the sealed cave and Lawson's weathered cottage in New Haven. Robert Ellis sat in his flat on Marine Parade, the leather journal spread. Before him, its pages heavy with the weight of decades-old secrets. Inspector Helen Carter had taken Lawson into custody, but the discovery of the locked chest and Evelyn's letter had opened a new thread, one that promised to unravel the final piece of the puzzle. The letter, postmarked from London in 1972, hinted at a partner who'd coerced Lawson into the killings. Its smudged signature was a tantalizing clue. Helen vowed to pursue it, her determination reignited despite the exhaustion of the past month. The next morning, Helen and Robert boarded a train to London, the clatter of the rails matching the rhythm of their thoughts. They headed to Scotland Yard, where Helen's contacts pulled records of Evelyn Caldwell, the wife of Thomas Caldwell. From the 1972 disappearance, Evelyn had died in 1980, but her address, Well Baker Street, a modest flat in Marylebone, led them to her son, James Caldwell. Now 38 and a solicitor living in Hampstead, James welcomed them with a weary expression. His office lined with law books, the air thick with the scent of old paper. He admitted his mother had been devastated by his father's disappearance, but had never known the full story. When shown the letter, his face paled. "She wrote this?" "She never told me," he whispered, his hands trembling as he read her plea. "Stop this, Henry. Let my family go, or I'll expose you both." James revealed a fragmented memory from his childhood. His mother receiving late-night calls in 1972, her voice hushed and fearful, followed by a visit from a man in a dark suit who left with a briefcase. Evelyn had burned letters afterward, but James recalled her mentioning a partner in the city who'd threatened her silence. Robert pressed for more, and James dug out an old photo album, finding a snapshot from 1971 of Evelyn with a man at a London pub, tall, balding, with a sharp jawline. The back read, "Evelyn and Mr. Hargrove, the George, 1971. Robert's breath caught. Hargrove, a name too close to Hargreaves. Could there be a connection? Helen ran the name through police records, uncovering a Reginald Hargrove, a 70-year-old, retired customs officer living in Kensington, with a history of corruption allegations in the 1970s. They drove to Kensington, a leafy district of grand houses and quiet streets, and knocked on Hargrove's door. The man who answered was frail, his once sharp features softened by age, but his eyes flickered with recognition when he saw Robert's badge. Invited inside, they sat in a parlor filled with nautical memorabilia, the walls adorned with ship models and a faded map of the Channel. Hargrove denied knowing Lawson at first, but when confronted with the letter and photo, his resolve cracked. "It was business," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Worked customs, caught wind of Lawson's smuggling, offered to look the other way for a cut. But those families, they weren't part of the plan." Hargrove confessed that in 1972, he tipped Lawson off about a Coast Guard patrol, forcing Lawson to eliminate the Caldwells when they witnessed the operation. Evelyn's threat to expose them had kept him silent. But in 1998, when the Hargreaves stumbled into the same trap, Hargrove had pressured Lawson to repeat the act, fearing his past would resurface. "I didn't want blood," he said, his hands shaking, but Lawson, he was ruthless. The help note, Hargrove claimed, was John Hargreaves' desperate plea, slipped into the cooler as Lawson sank their bodies. Hargrove had retired shortly after, burying his guilt in a quiet life, but the letter proved his involvement. Helen arrested him, the final link in the chain, though her expression was one of grim satisfaction rather than triumph. Back in Brighton. The case closed with a public announcement on August 12, 1998. The Times ran, "London mastermind behind Hove Beach murders," detailing Hargrove's role in Lawson's confessions. The cave remains were fully exhumed, confirming the Hargreaves and Caldwells, their identities verified through dental records and personal effects. The community held a joint memorial on Hove Beach, the shoreline lined with flowers and photographs, the groin now a somber monument. Clara placed a wreath for Margaret, her tears mingling with the sea spray, while James Caldwell attended, laying roses for his lost parents. The plaque erected read, "In memory of the Hargreaves and Caldwells, taken by the fog." 1972 and 1998, Robert sat on the beach that evening, the journal and letter in his hands, the sea's rhythm, a final farewell. He reflected on the irony. Two families, decades apart, undone by the same greed, their lives snuffed out in the cave's dark embrace. The fog phantom legend faded, replaced by the stark reality of human malice. Helen visited him the next day, offering a quiet thanks. But her focus shifted to tying up loose ends. Hargrove's assets, Lawson's trial. The case was solved, but the town bore its scars. The beach, forever marked by tragedy, yet one mystery lingered. Among Hargrove's belongings, a sealed envelope was found, addressed to Evelyn, but never sent. Inside was a confession written in 1972, admitting his role in the Caldwells' death and hinting at a third-party customs official higher up who'd ordered the cover-up. The name was redacted, the ink smeared beyond recognition, but the postmark read Hull, 1972. Helen vowed to pursue it, though Robert doubted they'd ever know the full truth. The sea had given up its secrets, but the corridors of power held one last shadow. As Brighton moved on, the cave remained sealed, its depths silent, the Hargreaves and Caldwells at rest. But the puzzle of the unnamed mastermind lingered, a whisper in the fog,